The massive starship's celestial throne materialized in Earth's orbit 3 solar cycles ahead of schedule, its crystalline hull gleaming like polished obsidian against the void. Emperor Vorthak the Eternal stretched his magnificent scaled form across the command throne, golden eyes surveying the blue-green world below with predatory satisfaction. His empire had conquered 17 star systems, each one falling within days of his arrival. This primitive world would be no different. "My lord," hissed General Zenith, her serpentine head bowing low, "the advanced scouts report the humans are completely unaware of our presence. Their technology is laughably primitive. This conquest will take mere hours." Vorthak's massive wings rustled with amusement. Standing nearly 12 feet tall when fully erect, his draconic form was an imposing sight that had broken the will of countless alien species. His scales shifted from deep emerald to burnished gold as his mood elevated, ancient runes carved into his hide pulsing with ethereal light. "Excellent. Deploy the harvester pods to their major population centers. I want their leaders brought before me within the day." The Emperor's voice rumbled like distant thunder, carrying the authority of millennia. This species will serve as laborers for the Outer Rim colonies. The invasion began with surgical precision. Harvester pods, each the size of a city block, descended from the mother ship like falling stars. They landed in New York, London, Tokyo, and Moscow simultaneously. From each pod emerged hundreds of draconian soldiers, 7-foot-tall humanoid reptiles with advanced plasma weaponry and energy shields that rendered human military responses utterly useless. Within 6 hours, the major world governments had surrendered unconditionally. The speed was even faster than Vorthak had anticipated. These humans folded quicker than the crystalline beings of Zirian Prime, and they had lasted only 3 hours. "Bring me their leaders," Vorthak commanded from his temporary throne room established in what had once been the United Nations building. The Great Hall had been cleared of human furniture and decorated with draconian banners depicting his conquests. One by one, presidents, prime ministers, and generals were marched before him in energy shackles. They trembled appropriately, some weeping, others trying to maintain dignity in the face of obvious defeat. Vorthak barely paid attention as General Zenith read their surrender terms and assigned them to various labor colonies. It was during this tedious process that she entered the room. Vorthak's attention was drawn to a small human female carrying a simple tray with what appeared to be water and food. She couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, with shoulder-length brown hair, and wearing what his translators identified as scrubs, some kind of service uniform. Unlike every other human he had encountered, she showed no fear. Her movements were purposeful, efficient, and strangely calming. "What is that one doing here?" he asked, his great head turning to follow her movement. General Zenith followed his gaze. "Ah, one of the building's maintenance staff, my lord. She was here when we arrived. We've been using her to fetch refreshments while we process the surrender ceremonies." The human woman moved between the cowering world leaders, offering water to those who appeared faint, helping an elderly ambassador to his feet when he stumbled. Her actions were gentle, but performed with a quiet competence that caught the Emperor's attention. "You there, human!" Vorthak's voice boomed across the hall. The assembled leaders flinched at the sound, but the small woman simply turned calmly toward him. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady and professional. The simple response sent a ripple of shocked silence through the room. Every other human had addressed him as Your Majesty or Great Lord, or simply stammered incoherently. This one spoke as if he were simply another person requiring her attention. "What is your designation?" he asked, leaning forward slightly on his throne. "Sarah Chun. I'm a nurse practitioner. I was working the overnight shift in the medical clinic on the 42nd floor when your people arrived." "And you're not afraid?" Sarah paused thoughtfully, tilting her head slightly. "Should I be? You don't seem to be harming anyone unnecessarily. Your soldiers helped evacuate the building safely. They even assisted Mrs. Rodriguez from accounting. She's 8 months pregnant and was having trouble with the stairs. Vorthak blinked slowly, a gesture that in his species indicated profound confusion. In 17 conquered worlds, no being had ever responded to his presence with such calm analysis of his actions rather than terror at his appearance. "I am Emperor Vorthak the Eternal," he said, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height. "Conqueror of the Andromeda Spiral, destroyer of the Keltharian fleet, master of—" "That's very impressive," Sarah interrupted gently, then turned to one of the trembling ambassadors. "Sir, you look pale. Or did you last eat something?" She completely ignored the Emperor's recitation of his conquest to focus on the human's immediate medical needs. Vorthak's jaw hung open slightly, another first in his centuries of existence. General Zenith looked ready to incinerate the impertinent human on the spot, but Vorthak held up a massive clawed hand. He found himself genuinely curious about this strange creature's behavior. "You dare interrupt the Emperor's," Zenith began, but Vorthak silenced her with a look. "Tell me, Sarah Chun," he said slowly, "why do you not cower before my might?" Sarah finished helping the ambassador drink some water before turning back to him. "Well, you're clearly very powerful, and I'm sure you could hurt me easily if you wanted to. But you haven't. Instead, your soldiers have been relatively courteous during what could have been a much more violent situation. That suggests you're either very confident in your control, which you should be, or you're not unnecessarily cruel." She paused, studying his massive form with the same clinical attention she might give a patient. "Also, you keep your claws retracted when you're not actively threatening someone. Your body language suggests you're bored rather than aggressive, and you've positioned yourself to address everyone in the room equally rather than looming over them for intimidation effect." Vorthak stared at this tiny human who had just analyzed his body language like a battlefield tactical assessment. No being in a galaxy had ever spoken to him with such casual professional detachment. "You observe much for such a small creature. It's part of my job. I assess people's conditions quickly and respond appropriately. Are you feeling all right, by the way? Your breathing seems slightly irregular." The question was so unexpected that Vorthak actually looked down at his chest. His breathing was slightly labored. The Earth's atmosphere was a bit too rich in oxygen for his species, though perfectly tolerable. He had never mentioned this to anyone, had barely noticed it himself. "How did you?" "The slight flare of your nostrils every few breaths, and the way you pause fractionally between words occasionally. It's subtle, but I work with respiratory issues frequently. Nothing dangerous, just mild hyperoxia. It might help if you breathe more slowly and deeply." Without thinking, Vorthak found himself adjusting his breathing pattern. The slight discomfort he had been unconsciously ignoring faded immediately. General Zenith looked as if she might molt from shock. Several of the human leaders had stopped crying to stare in amazement. The Dragon Emperor, conqueror of star systems, was taking medical advice from a human nurse. "My lord," Zenith whispered urgently, "perhaps we should continue with the surrender protocols." But Vorthak was no longer interested in the trembling politicians. His attention remained fixed on this remarkable human female who treated everyone in the room, conquered leaders and alien conquerors alike, with the same calm, professional care. "These others bore me," he announced suddenly. General Zenith processed their surrender documents and assigned them quarters appropriate to their new status. "I would speak further with this nurse practitioner. My lord, surely a conquered servant is not worthy of—" "Are you questioning my judgment, General?" Zenith's head snapped down in immediate submission. "Of course not, my emperor. I shall see to the others immediately." As the room emptied of everyone except Vorthak, Sarah, and a minimal honor guard, the Emperor found himself in the unprecedented situation of being genuinely curious about another being's thoughts rather than simply demanding their submission. "So, Sarah Chun," he said, his voice dropping to a more conversational rumble, "you truly feel no fear in my presence?" Sarah considered this carefully, apparently giving the question serious thought rather than scrambling to provide an answer she thought he wanted to hear. "I feel concerned," she said finally. "Not for myself specifically, but for what this change means for everyone. Fear would be counterproductive right now. There are people who need medical attention, others who are in shock, some who probably haven't eaten or slept properly in hours because of the stress. If I spend my energy being afraid, I can't help with any of those problems. And you believe helping them is your responsibility? It's what I'm trained for. It's what I'm good at." She paused. "And it's what needs doing." That simple statement resonated through Vorthak's mind as he studied this extraordinary human. Every other species he had conquered had focused on their own survival, their own fear, their own loss of status and freedom. This one was worried about whether strangers had eaten recently. "Show me," he said impulsively. "Show you what? This helping you speak of. I would observe how you tend to others." Sarah looked around the now empty hall, then back at him. "Well, there's not much I can do here. Most of the people who needed immediate attention have been taken to quarters where they can rest. But if you're serious, there's always the emergency shelter they set up in the basement. A lot of city residents came here when your ships appeared. Some of them have probably been here for hours without proper care." Vorthak found himself rising from his throne. "Lead on." As they walked through the corridors of the building, Vorthak noticed things he had missed during his triumphant entry. Sarah stopped to right an overturned plant, picked up scattered papers that someone had dropped, and straightened a crooked painting on the wall. These small acts of restoration seemed unconscious, automatic. "Why do you do that?" he asked, gesturing to her straightening of the papers. "Do what? Clean. Repair. This is no longer their building. It serves no strategic purpose." Sarah looked puzzled by the question. "It doesn't hurt anything to tidy up. And if someone needs those papers later, they'll be easier to find." The concept was alien to him. In Draconian society, conquered territories were stripped of resources and the indigenous population relocated. The idea of maintaining the conquered civilization's infrastructure for their own benefit was not merely foreign. It was incomprehensible. They descended to the basement, where Vorthak discovered several hundred humans had taken shelter. They were arranged in family groups on blankets and sleeping bags, sharing food and water, comforting crying children, and helping elderly individuals find comfortable places to rest. What struck him immediately was that his guards were also present, but they were helping. Sergeant Karath, a battle-hardened veteran of 12 campaigns, was carefully helping an elderly human male with what appeared to be a walking device. Lieutenant Vex was accepting a cup of some steaming liquid from a young human mother who was clearly terrified, but insisting on offering hospitality to her conquerors. "What is this?" Vorthak demanded. Sarah looked around the room. "Oh, this is much better than I expected. It looks like your people and mine are figuring out how to share the space peacefully. My soldiers are serving them. I think it's more that everyone's just helping everyone. Mrs. Kim over there speaks fluent Korean and Mandarin. She's been helping translate for some of your soldiers who are having trouble with the children's questions. And Sergeant Karath, he figured out that Mr. Peterson's walker wasn't working right and fixed it somehow." Vorthak watched in growing amazement as Karath demonstrated the repaired walking device to the grateful human, whose face was wet with tears of relief and gratitude. The grizzled Draconian sergeant was actually smiling, an expression Vorthak had never seen on any of his soldiers' faces. "This is not how conquests proceed," he murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. "Maybe that's because this isn't really a conquest in the usual sense?" Sarah suggested gently. "I mean, yes, you could obviously destroy us or force us to do whatever you wanted. But you haven't. You've been considerate. So people are responding to that." She moved into the room and was immediately surrounded by humans seeking her attention. A child with a scraped knee, an adult with obvious signs of anxiety, an elderly woman who seemed disoriented. Sarah triaged them quickly and efficiently, providing care, comfort, and guidance with smooth competence. But what fascinated Vorthak was that she also approached his soldiers. She checked whether Sergeant Karath needed anything, offered Lieutenant Vex some kind of pain relief when she noticed him favoring one arm, and somehow managed to include all of them in her circuit of care. More astounding still, his soldiers were accepting her help. Veterans of multiple Star Wars were allowing a tiny human female to examine their minor injuries and offer them assistance. And they seemed relaxed. Content, even. My Emperor, Lieutenant Vex approached hesitantly. The human healers have been most helpful. Private Zess was having difficulty with the atmospheric mixture, and one of their medical practitioners provided a simple modification that resolved the issue completely. Vorthak turned to see Private Zess breathing comfortably, his usual post-conquest stress notably absent. A human male was sitting beside him, showing him pictures of what appeared to be his family and receiving similar images from Zess in return. They're sharing images of their offspring, Vorthak observed with wonder. Yes, my lord. It appears the humans have strong familial bonds similar to our own. Private Zess was expressing concern about his mate and hatchlings on the homeworld, and the humans began showing him their own family images too. I believe the term is commiserate. Vorthak watched this unprecedented scene unfold around him. Every conquest in his experience had followed the same pattern: invasion, resistance, defeat, subjugation, and eventual bitter acceptance. The conquered species would comply with his demands out of fear and necessity, but there was always resentment, always the simmering potential for rebellion. This was entirely different. His soldiers were not maintaining dominance through intimidation. They were collaborating. The humans were not plotting resistance. They were offering hospitality. Instead of the usual post-conquest tension, there was an atmosphere of mutual aid and growing understanding. "Sarah," he called, and she immediately approached, carrying a small human who appeared to be sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Yes. Explain to me what is happening here." She looked around the room thoughtfully. "People are taking care of each other. Your soldiers are far from home, probably stressed from the invasion, dealing with an unfamiliar environment. The humans are scared, displaced, uncertain about the future. Both groups have needs, and both groups have the ability to help meet those needs. So they are. This is not fear-based compliance. No, it's not. It's just people being people. Most individuals, regardless of species apparently, want to help when they can and accept help when they need it. Fear makes that harder, but it doesn't eliminate it entirely." Vorthak processed this information, his mind reeling. "In my experience, conquered populations require strict control to prevent rebellion. Maybe that's because they were treated like conquered populations instead of like people." Sarah suggested gently. "I mean, if someone invaded my home, but then treated my family kindly, helped my injured relatives, and respected our customs, I'd probably be a lot more cooperative than if they just demanded submission through force." The sleeping child in her arms stirred slightly, and Sarah automatically adjusted her hold to ensure the small being's comfort. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive, that Vorthak almost missed its significance. "You hold their young as if they were your own. She's not my own, but she's a child, and she's scared. Children need comfort when they're afraid. It doesn't matter whose child they are." That statement hit Vorthak like a physical blow. Throughout his empire, young of conquered species were separated from their families and raised in institutional facilities to ensure loyalty to the draconian state. It was efficient, practical, and effective. It was also, he was beginning to realize, potentially unnecessary. "My lord," General Zenith's voice came from the shelter entrance. "I have completed processing the human leadership. They have been assigned quarters and will be ready for transport to the labor colonies within a day." Vorthak looked around the room once more at the unprecedented scene of peaceful cooperation between conqueror and conquered, at his own soldiers exhibiting more contentment than he had seen in years of campaigning, at the small human female who had somehow created this impossible situation through nothing more than treating everyone with basic care and dignity. "Delay those transport orders, General." "My lord, I require more time to evaluate this population. There may be factors we have not considered." Zenith's expression suggested she thought her emperor had lost his mind, but she bowed deeply. "As you command, my lord." After she left, Sarah looked up at him with those calm, assessing eyes. "You're not really planning to ship everyone off to labor colonies, are you?" The question was asked without accusation or fear, just genuine curiosity. Vorthak found himself considering his answer more carefully than he had considered anything in decades. "That was the plan," he admitted. But I am beginning to suspect that plan may be inefficient." Sarah smiled, the first truly warm expression he had seen from her. "I think you might be right about that." As he watched her return to her quiet, competent care of everyone around her, Vorthak found himself questioning fundamental assumptions that had guided his conquests for centuries. Perhaps there were more effective ways to expand an empire than through fear and force alone. Perhaps this small human female was about to teach the Dragon Emperor something entirely new about power. The next morning brought a crisis that would test every assumption Vorthak had begun to question. A massive explosion rocked the eastern district of the city, followed by emergency broadcasts in the human communication networks. A chemical processing facility had suffered a catastrophic failure, releasing toxic compounds into a densely populated area. Vorthak stood in his temporary command center, watching feeds from his scout drones as the disaster unfolded. Hundreds of humans were fleeing the affected zone, many already showing signs of chemical exposure. His tactical advisors were providing rapid assessments of the situation. "My lord," reported Commander Thex, "the explosion appears to be accidental, a failure in their primitive industrial systems. The toxic cloud is spreading rapidly. Our atmospheric analysis indicates the compounds are highly dangerous to human physiology." "Estimated casualties?" Vorthak asked, though he was not entirely sure why he cared about the answer. "Without intervention, likely several thousand within the first day. Potentially tens of thousands if the contamination spreads to the water supply." General Zenith leaned forward eagerly. "This solves our labor shortage concerns, my lord. The population reduction will make the remaining humans easier to manage. We need take no action." Vorthak found himself staring at his general with something approaching disgust. The casual dismissal of thousands of lives struck him as not just callous, but wasteful. After yesterday's observations, he was beginning to understand that these humans represented a resource more valuable than simple manual labor. "Sir," Sarah's voice came from the entrance as she hurried into the command center without waiting for permission. Vorthak noticed that his guards had not stopped her. After yesterday, they seemed to have accepted her presence as natural. "My emperor," General Zenith hissed. "This human has no clearance to speak," Vorthak commanded, cutting off his general's objections. Sarah moved directly to the tactical display showing the disaster zone. "Are those real-time images of the chemical release?" "They are. Do you comprehend the situation?" "Yes, and it's bad. That's a petrochemical plant. The smoke patterns suggest they had a benzene storage tank rupture, probably triggered a cascade failure in their alkylation unit." Sarah's technical knowledge surprised him, but she continued without pause. "People in that area need immediate decontamination and medical treatment, or they're going to start dying within hours." "This is not our concern," Zenith stated firmly. "These are not our people." Sarah turned to look at the general with an expression Vorthak had not seen from her before, one of complete incredulity. "There are children in that area. Families. People who were just living their lives, and now they're poisoned through no fault of their own. Acceptable casualties in any conquest scenario." "No," Sarah said flatly, then turned back to Vorthak. "Sir, your ships have advanced atmospheric processing capabilities, don't they? And your medical technology is clearly superior to ours. You could save those people." Vorthak studied the tactical display, his mind calculating rapidly. His fleet did indeed have the technology to neutralize the toxic cloud and treat the affected population. The question was whether he wanted to reveal those capabilities. "Why should I?" he asked, genuinely curious about her response. "Because you can," Sarah replied immediately. "Because they're dying and you have the power to prevent it. and that makes it your choice whether they live or die. They're conquered people. Their welfare is not my responsibility. Sarah stepped closer to him, her expression intensifying. Yesterday you told me you were Emperor Vorthak the Eternal, conqueror of the Andromeda Spiral, master of whatever else. If you're truly the master of this world now, then these are your people. And a leader who lets his people die when he could save them isn't much of a leader. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. General Zenith looked ready to incinerate Sarah on the spot, but Vorthak held up a restraining hand. The small human had just questioned his leadership abilities to his face in front of his officers, and somehow made it sound like practical advice rather than insubordination. Interesting perspective, he rumbled. And if I were to deploy our resources to address this situation, what would you recommend? Sarah immediately moved to the display controls, her fingers dancing over the interface as if she had been using draconian technology for years. Your atmospheric processors here, and here, she said, highlighting positions around the toxic cloud. Counter-rotating dispersal patterns to break up the chemical concentrations and neutralize them. Medical stations at these evacuation points. Your scanners can identify exposure levels and direct treatment protocols. She paused, looking up at him. But you'll need human medical staff to interface with the victims. People are going to be terrified, injured, watching their children suffer. They need familiar faces, people who speak their languages, medical professionals who understand human psychology as well as physiology. You are suggesting a joint operation, Vorthak observed. I'm suggesting the most effective response to save the maximum number of lives. Commander Thex stepped forward hesitantly. My lord, she has actually outlined a tactically sound approach. Our atmospheric processors could neutralize the contamination within 6 hours. Combined with our medical facilities, casualty rates could be reduced to near zero. But it would require revealing significant technological capabilities to a conquered population, Zenith objected. It establishes precedents about our obligations to subject peoples. Vorthak found himself at a crossroads that had never existed in any of his previous conquests. Every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine, every lesson from 17 successful campaigns argued against what Sarah was proposing. Conquerors did not spend resources saving conquered populations from natural disasters. It was inefficient, strategically questionable, and potentially dangerous. Yet as he looked at the tactical display showing hundreds of humans fleeing in terror from an invisible death, he found those doctrines suddenly felt hollow. Deploy the atmosphere processors, he commanded. My lord, Zenith's voice cracked with shock. You heard my command, General. Deploy atmosphere processors to the coordinates the human indicated. Prepare medical stations at the evacuation points. And he paused, making a decision that surprised even himself. Coordinate with human medical personnel on treatment protocols. Sir, Sarah said quietly, thank you. Her simple gratitude affected him more than the submission of entire star systems. Within 30 minutes, Vorthak's fleet was conducting its most unusual operation in centuries, a massive humanitarian rescue of the population they had conquered the day before. Vorthak decided to observe the operation personally, transporting to one of the medical stations that had been rapidly established at a safe distance from the contamination zone. What he found there exceeded even his revised expectations of human behavior. Human medical personnel were working alongside draconian medics, communicating through hastily programmed translation devices and improvised sign language. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, identified as the city's chief emergency physician, was directing triage operations with calm efficiency while accepting real-time data from draconian medical scanners she had never seen before. Contamination levels in Sector 7 are dropping rapidly, reported Lieutenant Vex, who was coordinating scanner data. Your atmospheric processors are exceeding projected effectiveness. Dr. Warren looked up from a patient she was treating. That's wonderful news. How long before it's safe for rescue teams to enter the affected residential areas? Approximately 2 hours at current neutralization rates. Excellent. We've got people trapped in several apartment buildings who couldn't evacuate in time. The sooner we can get to them, the better their chances." Vorthak watched this exchange with fascination. The human physician was treating his officer as a professional colleague rather than an alien occupier. More significantly, Lieutenant Vex was responding in kind, offering information and assistance with genuine cooperation rather than grudging compliance with orders. "Dr. Warren," he called, and the woman immediately approached him with the same calm professionalism Sarah had shown. "Emperor Vorthak, sir, I wanted to thank you personally for this intervention. You're saving thousands of lives today. You are not afraid to approach me directly?" Dr. Warren smiled. "Honestly, I'm too busy to be afraid right now. We've got people who need help, and your people are providing incredible assistance. Fear seems like a waste of energy under the circumstances." That phrase echoed what Sarah had said the previous day. Vorthak was beginning to suspect this practical approach to crisis situations might be characteristic of human medical professionals specifically. "Tell me, Doctor, how do you assess the effectiveness of this joint operation?" "It's remarkable," she replied immediately. "Your technology is letting us save people who would have been beyond our help with conventional treatment. And your people." She gestured toward a draconian medic who was carefully treating an injured child while the child's mother held her hand. "They're natural healers. They understand suffering, and they want to stop it." Vorthak followed her gaze. Corporal Raff, a soldier trained for combat operations, was indeed treating the human child with extraordinary gentleness. The little girl was actually smiling at him, chattering in the way young humans apparently did, while Corporal Raff listened with what appeared to be genuine interest despite the language barrier. "How is this possible?" Vorthak murmured. "How is what possible?" "This cooperation. In my experience, conquered populations resist their occupiers, even when assistance is offered. They assume deception or manipulation. But your people are working alongside my soldiers as if they were trusted allies." Dr. Warren considered this thoughtfully. "Well, your soldiers aren't acting like occupiers. They're acting like people who want to help. When someone's trying to save your neighbor's life, it's pretty hard to think of them as the enemy." She paused, studying his massive form with obvious curiosity. "Can I ask you something, sir?" "Speak. Why are you doing this?" "I mean, from a purely strategic standpoint, you don't gain anything from saving us. If anything, this operation probably costs you resources and reveals capabilities you might prefer to keep secret. So what?" The question struck to the heart of Vorthak's own confusion about his decisions. Every rational analysis suggested this operation was inefficient at best, strategically questionable at worst. Yet he had not hesitated to order it. "I am uncertain," he admitted. "Yesterday, one of your people suggested that effective leadership requires caring for the welfare of those under your authority. I am testing that hypothesis." Sarah mentioned she talked with you. She's like that. She has a way of making people think about things differently. You know Sarah-chan? We work in the same building complex. She's one of our best nurse practitioners. Also one of the few people I know who can find something to like in absolutely anyone. Dr. Warren smiled. "She told me you were surprisingly thoughtful for a galactic conqueror." Coming from Sarah, that's high praise. Vorthak found himself oddly pleased by this assessment. "She has made observations about leadership methods that I had not previously considered." That sounds like Sarah. She has a gift for seeing the best in people and bringing it out. Makes her incredibly effective with difficult patients. Difficult patients? People who are scared, angry, or resistant to treatment. Sarah can usually find a way to connect with them, help them understand that she's trying to help, not hurt them. It's a rare skill. As Dr. Warren returned to her patients, Vorthak began to understand something important. Sarah's approach to him had not been naivety or fearlessness. It had been professional technique. She had treated him exactly as she would any difficult patient, with calm professionalism designed to reduce defensiveness and encourage cooperation. The realization that he had been successfully managed by a human medical professional should have been humiliating. Instead, he found it intriguing. Her methods had been effective precisely because they had not felt like manipulation. They had felt like genuine care and respect. My Emperor, Sarah's voice came from behind him. She had arrived at the medical station, wearing what appeared to be emergency protective equipment modified for human use. Dr. Warren asked me to coordinate with your medical teams on the long-term treatment protocols for exposure victims. You came here directly from the contamination zone, he observed, noting the residual chemical traces his enhanced senses detected. Someone needed to verify that your decontamination procedures were compatible with human physiology. I volunteered. She paused, studying his expression. You look concerned. You expose yourself to danger unnecessarily. There were other ways to obtain that information. Possibly, but this was faster and more reliable. And someone needed to talk to the people who were trapped in the residential areas, explain what was happening, help coordinate the evacuations. They were terrified. Alien ships, strange soldiers, toxic clouds. They needed familiar faces telling them they were going to be okay. Vorthak realized that while he had been observing the medical operation from a safe distance, Sarah had been in the contamination zone itself, serving as a liaison between his rescue teams and the trapped humans. Report, he commanded, though his tone was gentler than he typically used for status briefings. All residential buildings have been cleared. No fatalities so far, though we have about 60 people with various levels of exposure who need continued treatment. Your medical scanners identified contamination levels we couldn't have detected with our equipment, probably saved a dozen lives by catching early-stage poisoning before symptoms appeared. She pulled out a small device that appeared to be a human data recorder. I documented the entire operation from the human side. Evacuation procedures, medical protocols, coordination methods. If you're planning to do more joint operations like this, it might be useful reference material. The casual assumption that there would be future joint operations struck Vorthak as both presumptuous and oddly natural. This small human was already thinking about how to improve their cooperative efforts. Why would you assist in developing more effective conquest protocols? He asked. Sarah looked at him with surprise. Conquest protocols? This wasn't a conquest operation. This was a rescue operation. If there are future emergencies, and there always are, it would be good to know what worked well and what could be improved. Her reframing of his military operation as a humanitarian effort was so matter-of-fact that it took him a moment to process the implications. She was not thinking about him as a conqueror, using her people as resources. She was thinking about both populations as communities that might need to work together in the future. Sarah, he said slowly, do you understand your current situation? Your species has been conquered. Your world is now part of the Draconian Empire. Your people will be relocated to serve Imperial needs. She nodded calmly. That was the original plan, according to General Zenith. But plans change when circumstances change. Today you proved that cooperation is more effective than subjugation, at least for some purposes. Tomorrow you might discover that peaceful integration produces better results than forced relocation. You assume much about my intentions. I observe your actions, Sarah corrected. Yesterday you could have simply demanded surrender and transported everyone to labor camps. Instead, you took time to understand the situation. Today, you could have let thousands of people die and simplified your occupation logistics. Instead, you save them. Those are the actions of someone who's reconsidering his approach. Vorthak found himself staring at this remarkable human who had somehow managed to reframe his conquest of her world as an evolving diplomatic relationship. Her confidence in his capacity for growth was both flattering and unsettling. And if I do decide to proceed with the original relocation plans, Sarah shrugged. Then you do. I can't stop you. But I think you're too smart to waste this opportunity. What opportunity? The chance to find out what happens when conquerors and conquered become partners instead of masters and slaves. You're the first Galactic Emperor in a position to attempt that experiment. Seems like it would be worth trying, especially since the traditional approach hasn't seemed to make you particularly happy. The casual observation that he was not happy in his role as conquering emperor hit him like a revelation. He had never considered his own emotional state relevant to his effectiveness as a ruler. Yet as he looked around at his soldiers working alongside humans in genuine cooperation, at the expressions of satisfaction and purpose on their faces, he realized that Sarah was absolutely correct. Traditional conquest made his people efficient and feared. This new approach seemed to be making them content and respected. The difference was more significant than he had previously understood. "You continue to surprise me, Sarah-chan." "Good," she replied with that warm smile. "Life's more interesting when people surprise each other." As the day ended and the contamination crisis was fully resolved, Vorthak stood in his command center reviewing operation reports that read like nothing in his military experience. 0 casualties among the affected population. 97% effectiveness in contamination neutralization. Most remarkably, post-operation surveys indicated that human cooperation with draconian forces had increased dramatically. Instead of fear and resentment, the humans were expressing gratitude and growing trust. Several had specifically requested to continue working with his medical teams on other public health initiatives. General Zenith reviewed the same reports with obvious bewilderment. "My lord, I do not understand these results. The humans are responding as if we were allies rather than conquerors." "Perhaps," Vorthak said thoughtfully, "because that is how we have behaved toward them." He found himself thinking about Sarah's challenge regarding his role as a leader, her matter-of-fact assumption that cooperation was possible, and her casual confidence in his capacity to choose growth over tradition. For the first time in his centuries of conquest, Emperor Vorthak began to wonder if there might be better ways to build an empire than through fear and subjugation. And if a small human nurse practitioner might be exactly the advisor he needed to discover what those methods looked like. 2 weeks after the chemical plant rescue, Vorthak faced the most challenging moment of his reign. A priority transmission from the Draconian High Command had arrived, demanding immediate explanation for the unprecedented delay in processing the human conquest. Supreme Admiral Corzin, his direct superior in the imperial hierarchy, was requesting real-time communication. Vorthak stood in his command center, Sarah at his side reviewing medical reports from their latest joint operation, a response to a natural earthquake that had struck the region 3 days prior. Her presence during strategic communications would have been unthinkable before her arrival in his life. Now it seemed natural. "My lord," General Zenith announced nervously, "Supreme Admiral Corzin is ready for your report." The massive holographic image of Admiral Corzin materialized in the center of the room. Even as a projection, his presence was intimidating, larger than Vorthak himself, with battle scars covering his ancient scales and eyes that glowed with cold authority. He had personally overseen 43 successful conquests. "Emperor Vorthak," Corzin's voice rumbled with barely contained displeasure. "Explain the delay in processing conquest of Designation Earth. Your reports indicate the planet surrendered completely within the standard time frame. Yet 2 weeks have passed with no labor shipments, no resource extraction, and no administrative consolidation. What is the cause of this inefficiency?" Vorthak felt the weight of centuries of military protocol pressing down on him. Every answer that came to mind sounded like excuse or insubordination when measured against traditional conquest doctrine. "Supreme Admiral, I have been conducting extended evaluation of optimal integration strategies for this population." "Integration strategies?" Corzin's eyes flared with dangerous light. "Conquered populations require subjugation, not integration. Explain this deviation from standard procedures." "Sir," Sarah's voice came quietly from beside him, "you don't need to justify helping people." Her words were spoken softly enough that only Vorthak's enhanced hearing detected them, but their impact was immediate. She was right. He was allowing himself to be intimidated into defending choices that had proven more effective than traditional methods. "Supreme Admiral," Vorthak said, drawing himself to his full imposing height, "I have discovered that this population possesses unique characteristics that make conventional conquest protocols suboptimal." "Explain." "They respond to cooperative leadership with extraordinary productivity and loyalty. Traditional subjugation methods would waste these advantages. Corzin's holographic form leaned forward menacingly. You speak of cooperation with conquered species? This is dangerously close to treason, Emperor. Conquered populations serve the Empire through fear and discipline, not cooperation. With respect, Supreme Admiral, my results suggest otherwise. Vorthak activated his own tactical displays, showing detailed reports from the past 2 weeks. Population cooperation rates exceeding 90%. Productivity in assigned tasks surpassing projections by 300%. Zero incidents of sabotage or rebellion. Most significantly, voluntary assistance from humans in improving draconian operations and technology. These metrics are impossible, Corzin stated flatly. No conquered population achieves such cooperation levels without extensive conditioning protocols. Nevertheless, these are verified results. Then, explain your methods. What conditioning techniques have you employed? Vorthak hesitated. How could he explain that his most effective technique had been treating the conquered population with basic respect and dignity? That responding to their needs had somehow made them more willing to meet his? I've been guided by local advisors with expertise in human behavioral psychology, he said finally. Local advisors? Corzin's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You've been taking strategic advice from conquered aliens? I've been gathering intelligence about optimal management techniques from subject matter experts. Show me these advisors. Vorthak's blood went cold. Presenting Sarah to Supreme Admiral Corzin could be catastrophic. The Admiral would see only a conquered human presuming to advise a draconian emperor. The potential for misunderstanding was enormous. But Sarah stepped forward calmly before he could object. Supreme Admiral Corzin, she said with the same professional tone she had used for everyone she met. I'm Sarah Chun, nurse practitioner and medical advisor to Emperor Vorthak's integration team. The silence that followed was deafening. Corzin stared at the small human, as if she were some impossible apparition. A conquered human addresses me directly? His voice was barely controlled fury. A medical professional reporting on population management strategies, Sarah corrected gently. Would you like to review the operational data? Her complete lack of fear in the face of Corzin's intimidating presence was either suicidal bravery or professional competence taken to remarkable extremes. Vorthak suspected it was the latter. You dare, Supreme Admiral. Vorthak interrupted quickly. I request permission to demonstrate the effectiveness of these techniques. Corzin's attention snapped back to him. Demonstrate how? Allow me to show you the current operational status of this conquest, including productivity metrics, population compliance, and resource optimization. Judge the results rather than the methods. For long moments, Corzin stared at him with calculation rather than anger. The Supreme Admiral had not achieved his position through inflexibility. He valued results above all else. Very well. You have 30 minutes to present your case. But if these techniques prove ineffective or dangerous, you will implement immediate corrective measures. Understood. Over the next half hour, Vorthak presented the most unconventional military briefing in Draconian history. With Sarah providing technical details about human psychology and behavior, they demonstrated how cooperative techniques had achieved better results than force-based methods across every measurable metric. Population productivity was higher because humans were working willingly rather than under compulsion. Resource gathering was more efficient because humans were actively identifying opportunities rather than passively complying with orders. Most remarkably, the human population was voluntarily sharing technological improvements and scientific knowledge that would benefit the Empire. These humans have provided solutions to 17 outstanding technical challenges facing our fleet, Vorthak reported. Their medical knowledge has improved treatment protocols for 3 different draconian health conditions. Their engineering insights have increased efficiency in our atmosphere processors by 12%. Corzin studied the data with obvious disbelief. They volunteer this information? They share it, Sarah interjected. When people work together toward common goals, they naturally exchange knowledge and resources. It's more efficient than hoarding information. And you believe this cooperation will continue indefinitely. It will continue as long as the cooperative relationship continues, Sarah replied. Mutual benefit creates mutual loyalty. Fear-based compliance creates resentment and eventual rebellion. Corzin's gaze shifted between Vorthak and Sarah, clearly processing implications that challenged fundamental assumptions about Imperial management. Emperor Vorthak, he said finally, what you're describing is not conquest. It is alliance. Yes, Vorthak replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. And it appears to be more effective than conquest. The admission hung in the air like a detonated bomb. In all the history of the Draconian Empire, no emperor had ever suggested that alliance might be superior to conquest. This is unprecedented, Corzin said slowly. The Imperial Council will need to evaluate these claims thoroughly. I understand, Supreme Admiral. You will continue current operations, pending their review. But Vorthak, Corzin's voice carried a warning. If these techniques prove unstable, or if this population becomes problematic, you will implement traditional pacification measures immediately. Of course. And you, Corzin's attention turned to Sarah, who met his gaze with calm professionalism. You will prepare detailed reports on human psychology and behavioral management for transmission to Imperial Command. Your insights may be relevant to other operations. I'd be happy to help, Sarah replied. Though I should point out that effective cooperation requires understanding and respecting the specific characteristics of each population. Techniques that work with humans might not be appropriate for other species. Vorthak watched with amazement as this tiny human calmly advised the Supreme Admiral of the Draconian Fleet on interspecies relations as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After Corzin's image disappeared, General Zenith looked as if she were having difficulty processing what had just occurred. My lord, she said weakly, did we just convince Supreme Command to consider abandoning conquest doctrine? We demonstrated superior results, Vorthak corrected. The implications are for them to determine. Sarah was already pulling out her data recorder, apparently beginning work on the psychological reports Corzin had requested. This is actually exciting, she said conversationally. If your empire is willing to consider cooperative approaches, we might be able to help with some of the integration challenges you've probably faced in other territories. Integration challenges? Well, if you've been using fear-based conquest for centuries, you probably have populations that are compliant, but not particularly productive. Lots of passive resistance, minimal innovation, resources tied up in maintaining control. She looked up from her device. Some of those situations could probably be improved with different management approaches. Vorthak stared at her. Not only was she suggesting that his empire's traditional methods were inefficient, she was offering to help fix problems he had not even recognized as problems. You would assist in improving our management of other conquered territories? If it means better conditions for everyone involved, absolutely. Fear is exhausting for both the people being controlled and the people doing the controlling. Cooperation is more sustainable. And you believe other species would respond as humans have? Every species is different, but most intelligent beings prefer dignity and mutual respect to subjugation and fear. The specific approaches would need to be tailored, but the basic principle probably applies broadly. General Zenith was listening to this conversation with an expression of complete bewilderment. You are suggesting we reform the entire imperial structure? I'm suggesting you optimize it, Sarah corrected. Right now, you're probably spending enormous resources maintaining control over reluctant populations. If even half of those could be converted to cooperative partnerships, you'd free up massive resources for exploration, development, and expansion. She paused thoughtfully. Plus, cooperative populations are more likely to contribute innovations and improvements rather than just complying with orders. Your empire could become more technologically advanced and more efficient simultaneously. Vorthak found himself envisioning an empire built on cooperation rather than conquest, with member species contributing their unique strengths to collective advancement rather than simply providing labor and resources under duress. The concept was revolutionary. Such changes would require fundamental restructuring of imperial governance, he observed. Most worthwhile improvements do, Sarah agreed. But you're an emperor. If anyone has the authority to implement better systems, it's you. Her casual confidence in his ability to transform an empire that had existed for millennia was both inspiring and terrifying. She spoke as if positive change were not just possible, but inevitable, as if his power came with an obligation to use it for the benefit of all those under his authority. The Imperial Council will likely resist such proposals. Probably. Change is always uncomfortable, especially for people who benefit from the current system. Sarah smiled. But you've got results they can't argue with. And if you can demonstrate that cooperative approaches are more effective than traditional ones, practical considerations should eventually overcome resistance. And if they refuse to consider changes, then you keep doing what works here and let the results speak for themselves. Other emperors will notice that your territories are more productive and stable than traditionally managed ones. Success has a way of being persuasive. That evening, Vorthak stood on the observation deck of his flagship, looking down at the lights of the human cities below. 2 weeks ago, he had seen a world to be conquered and exploited. Now he saw a partner in an unprecedented experiment in interspecies cooperation. Sarah joined him at the viewing port, carrying 2 cups of what she had called tea, a human beverage she had been introducing to his crew. Several of his officers had become enthusiastic consumers of various human foods and drinks. "Penny for your thoughts?" she said, offering him one of the cups. Penny, old human expression, means what are you thinking about? Vorthak accepted the tea, which had become a pleasant ritual during their evening conversations. "I'm contemplating the magnitude of the changes you have initiated." "I didn't initiate anything. I just pointed out that cooperation works better than intimidation for most purposes. You have fundamentally altered my understanding of effective leadership." Sarah sipped her tea thoughtfully. "You know what I think? I think you were already a good leader. You just needed permission to act like one instead of like a conqueror." "Explain." "Everything you've done these past 2 weeks, saving people from the chemical disaster, helping with earthquake relief, making sure everyone has adequate food and medical care, those aren't the actions of someone who sees people as resources to be exploited. They're the actions of someone who feels responsible for the welfare of people under his authority." She paused, studying his reflection in the viewing port. "I think you were probably tired of conquest before you ever met me. You just didn't know there were alternatives." The observation struck him with the force of revelation. He had been going through the motions of conquest because it was what was expected, what was required, what he had been trained for. But Sarah was right. The satisfaction he felt now, working with humans rather than subjugating them, was entirely different from the hollow victory of traditional conquest. What do you believe will happen when word of these methods spreads through the empire? Some emperors will dismiss it as weakness. Some will be curious enough to try similar approaches. A few will probably get better results and become advocates for change. Sarah smiled, and eventually the empire will evolve into something better than it was. You have remarkable faith in the possibility of improvement. I have faith in people's ability to recognize better options when they see them, including your people. Vorthak considered this. His own officers were clearly more satisfied working cooperatively with humans than they had been in traditional conquest scenarios. Lieutenant Vex had volunteered to extend his rotation specifically to continue working on joint medical projects. Sergeant Karath had requested permission to study human engineering techniques. Even General Zenith, despite her initial resistance, had begun incorporating human insights into operational planning. "Sarah," he said finally, "I want to make a formal request." "Okay. I would like you to accept a position as official advisor to the Imperial expansion operations, not as a conquered subject, but as a partner in developing new approaches to interspecies relations." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering the implications. Would this position allow me to advocate for the welfare of all populations involved in imperial expansion? Not just humans, but other species as well. Yes. And would I have the authority to recommend against expansion in cases where it would be harmful to existing populations? You would have full advisory authority. Then yes, I accept. On one condition, which is we establish a formal framework for cooperative governance that protects the rights and dignity of all member species. No more conquest, only invitation to join a mutually beneficial alliance. Vorthak found himself smiling, expression that would have been unimaginable before meeting this remarkable human. You are asking me to transform the Draconian Empire into something entirely new. I'm asking you to let it become what it could be at its best. As they stood together, looking out at the peaceful world below, Vorthak realized that Sarah had given him something more valuable than another conquered territory. She had given him a vision of leadership that was based on service rather than dominance, cooperation rather than fear, growth rather than simple expansion. Emperor Vorthak, the Eternal, had come to Earth expecting to add another world to his collection of subjugated planets. Instead, he had discovered a new way to build an empire, one founded on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the revolutionary idea that true strength came not from the ability to conquer, but from the wisdom to lead. The Dragon Emperor had indeed come early, and in doing so, he had arrived just in time to discover that sometimes the most profound conquests were the ones that transformed the conqueror rather than the conquered. 3 months later, the first Interspecies Cooperative Council convened on Earth, with representatives from 12 different worlds working together to establish frameworks for peaceful expansion and mutual development. Emperor Vorthak presided over the sessions, with Sarah Chun serving as chief advisor for interspecies relations. The Draconian Empire had become something unprecedented in galactic history, an alliance built on choice rather than conquest, cooperation rather than subjugation, and the radical proposition that diverse species working together could achieve more than any single empire ruling through fear. And it all began because a small human nurse practitioner had treated a galactic emperor like any other person who needed care, guidance, and the opportunity to become better than he had been before.